A little bit about myself. So my name is John Boswell. I'm a therapist. I've been in practice since like end of 2014. I primarily specialize in treating people who are victims of trauma and personality disorders and people who love people with personality disorders, whether it be romantic or familial or all that good stuff. And I have a lot of history of family members with personality disorders and dating people with personality disorders. So I get it from both perspectives. so so I kind of got into this whole thing of doing online with just the hopes of maybe educating people, giving them some hope, some inspiration, and just hoping to kind of teach a little bit as well. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions then, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course.
So can I ask you what made you agree to doing it?
I saw your content, and to be honest, I don't agree with some of it. Some of it I do agree with.
Okay.
But I really wanted to get the opportunity to educate a larger audience of people on things like narcissistic and borderline personality disorders, since I do struggle with those disorders myself, and they are highly stigmatized.
They are. Oh, that's so cool that you agreed to do that. And I appreciate that's the whole kind of the point of it. I have so many people that talk about clients and even people in the comments that kind of demonize specific, especially narcissists, borderlines too.
Yeah.
And it's, I should tell you, it's not a supernatural entity we're talking about here. We're still talking about people. And it's just wiring in the brain is just a little bit different. And that's all. And it's not necessarily that their behaviors are malicious, but more so that they do things. This is how they learn to get their needs met.
Exactly.
Yes. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this. How long ago were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder when I was 16 years old. And then I very recently, I was diagnosed with NPD traits a few weeks ago. And then very recently, like last Wednesday, I brought all my traits to my psychiatrist. And I was like, hey, do we think? And she basically told me that I have it, but she's not willing to diagnose me.
Okay.
Which I thought was very strange. She said, you have it, but I don't like stacking personality disorders on top of each other, which I thought was weird because BPD and NPD are comorbid 40% of the time. And she also said that she doesn't want to fuel my grandiosity by giving me a diagnosis.
She's going to feel, wow. Okay. Okay. I'm not going to step on another provider's toes. Okay. I get what you're saying though. That's interesting. So do you agree with both diagnoses?
I do agree that I have both. It was very difficult for me to come to terms with the narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis, whereas with my borderline diagnosis, I was kind of more willing and accepting of it.
Okay.
Because the narcissistic diagnosis, I just felt like I didn't really fit it. And then my favorite person, which is a term that borderlines use to describe someone they're very emotionally attached to. My favorite person basically for 3 weeks was shoving my narcissistic behaviors in my face and basically being like, hey, this is why I feel like you're a narcissist. These are your behaviors. This is why I feel like you fit the criteria. And we ended up going through the criteria of NPD and the DSM together. And I was like, oh, wow, you're right. Like, I can't deny it at this point. Like, I do have a lot of these symptoms.
Wow. And it is very well possible to have more than one personality disorder.
Yeah.
It's tricky for us providers because we base everything when we diagnose off of what we see and what people tell us. So to one provider, they may only catch that it's BPD, as another may say, no, it's NPD. And it may be both, like you said.
Exactly.
So it can be really tricky. And then personality disorders is sometimes an overlap with symptoms. So it's very subjective science we're going by. In other words, is what I'm saying here.
Yeah, absolutely. My old therapist, I brought the behaviors to her because she was the one that diagnosed me with borderline. And I brought the narcissistic behaviors to her. And I found out she had a huge bias against narcissists. She said that they are all shitheads. That was like direct quote from her. And that they're all terrible people and they're all out to manipulate and that we wouldn't get along if I was a narcissist. Wow. So that was around the time that I was like, okay, it's time for me to look for another provider.
Yeah. I'm sorry you went through that. I'm glad she was honest enough with you too, though, to say, hey, I'm not going to be the provider for you, but she definitely could have been a little more gentle in her approach. Jeez.
Yeah. Definitely.
I went to school and in college, I had a professor and he used to call his clients rats. He primarily worked with people with were borderline and with substance abuse addiction. And we were like, that's horrible. Like, why would you say something like that? And then finally it comes out, like his mom struggled with addiction. And so he did a lot of projecting, and that's not cool, you know? Go see a
Yeah,
therapist.
exactly.
Out of your clients. Jeez. So how would you say treatment's been going for your disorders?
Treatment has been going much better since I switched therapists a few weeks ago. Because my old therapist also, I had an incident where I cheated on my favorite person when we were dating, and I gaslit him about it for 5 months. It was a terrible time in my life and in his, and I felt really bad about it because, unlike the stigma, narcissists can feel guilt, shame, remorse, all of those things. I felt very terrible about it. It is something I will never do again. And my therapist had actually encouraged me to lie to him about it because she played off of my fear of abandonment. She said, and I quote, "If you tell him, he will leave you and hate you forever." And so that kind of got me to kick in my fight or flight, my protective
Right.
of not wanting him to leave me. So, and I'm not blaming my therapist because those were ultimately my decisions and my actions to listen to her.
Okay.
However, she did kind of get the ball rolling for me to take those actions as opposed to doing what I wanted to do, which was tell him immediately.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow. That is nuts.
Yeah, when I tell people, they often do not believe me that I had a therapist that would encourage me to lie. And I get it. Like, that's a very unethical thing for a therapist to do.
Right. You know what? I totally believe you. And I will say this, there are a lot of bad therapists out there. A lot of good therapists. And there are a lot of bad therapists too, just like there are good cops and bad cops and doctors and so on and so on. We're taught that you're supposed to kind of know what your blind spots are. So if I know this is an insecurity of mine, maybe I shouldn't work with that population or I should look into that. But you're still dealing with humans, unfortunately. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry you had this bad experience, but I'm glad you found someone who's working better for you.
Yeah, she is. She is very helpful with me recognizing, because I don't typically recognize when I'm saying or doing something that's manipulative.
Okay.
I have to have people tell me like, hey, that was manipulative in order for me to recognize it. Because it just kind of subconsciously comes out, especially during arguments and things like that. And she's really working with me on like learning to say, hey, I need a break during an argument. Like, hey, I need a break so that I don't say something manipulative, or I need a break so that I can collect my thoughts to respond to what you said without being manipulative.
That's good. I commend you for having not only the insight to recognize that, hey, this is not working in my relationship, but for actually putting the work in. Because that's personality disorder or not, that's something that a lot of people struggle with. So that's excellent. Wow. How did you end up finding a better therapist? I'm sure that'd be helpful for a lot of people to know.
I just went online and searched up therapists in my area, and luckily I was lucky enough that the first one I found was one I really clicked with and really is willing to do more clinical stuff with me rather than just listening to me talk about my problems, because my old therapist would listen to me talk about my problems all the time, but she'd never be like, okay, so what can we do about this?
Right. Okay.
And my new therapist is more of like, okay, this is your problem. How do we resolve it? And what can we do about this problem in the future?
So they sound very solution focused. That's excellent. Are you
Yes.
doing dialectical behavioral therapy or DBT?
We incorporate some DBT skills into our talk therapy, but I'm
Okay.
not in a DBT group.
Gotcha. And just for the viewers, DBT or dialectical behavioral therapy, it's a type of therapy or intervention developed by a lady by name Francine Shapiro. And Francine was a therapist who also lived with BPD. And she came up with this wonderful intervention for treating the condition. It's kind of like the gold standard. Doesn't mean it's the only way to treat BPD. It's usually a lot of people's go-to though. So that's so awesome to hear that you're getting some of the skills from it. And you can do it that way really formally, like you said, but buy a textbook, or you can kind of do what I do is kind of take bits and pieces of what you need. Cool.
Exactly. I always say take what resonates, leave what doesn't.
Exactly. I love that. So do you feel as though that you are a full-blown narc, or do you feel like you just have traits, just so I clarify?
I feel that I am a full-blown narcissist because my psychiatrist did say that I have a lot of traits of it, a lot of characteristics. She agrees that I have it. She's just refusing to diagnose me for reasons that I believe are not good enough reasons to refuse somebody a diagnosis. But I do believe that I am a full-blown narc. I believe that I am a little bit, I'm on the, I don't want to say better, because no one's better than another person, in my opinion. Um, I do believe I am on the more mild side of narcissism, though. However, I don't really ever have a malicious intent when I'm speaking with people. I don't believe in using people for a personal gain. I don't believe in manipulating people to get what I want. I don't believe in doing any of that stuff. Some of that stuff I might do subconsciously, but I'll never do it with a malicious intent.
That's awesome. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions here, and some of these are actually from my social media manager. His name is Mark Thomas. He is awesome. And I actually had him come up with a few questions because he is a layperson. He doesn't know much about BPD or NPD. So I figured, okay, these are the kind of people we're trying to reach. Whole head excellent stuff. Did anyone ever confuse your diagnosis with bipolar disorder?
Yes, I was told that I was bipolar a lot, and it actually turns out that I was diagnosed bipolar in 2018. So I do have a lot of comorbidities with my disorders. My full list is like a laundry list. I've got bipolar, borderline, narcissism, ADHD, autism, CPTSD. That's like the whole list.
Gotcha. And that goes back to that subjectivity again I was talking about. It is possible that you just have all of them. And it's possible that there may be a misdiagnosis in there somewhere too. But bipolar and BPD we often see together, or we'll see BPD misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder. So it's actually interesting. What's something you wish people knew about BPD or understood about it?
I wish people understood that our emotions get all consuming and it's not a them problem, it's an us problem. However, we never want to make someone feel like their emotions or their feelings or their behaviors or anything like that are invalid, because we've been invalidated a lot. But when we get triggered, it's often like a switch flips in our brain, especially if someone is intentionally pushing us and trigger us. Everyone has a breaking point. Even people who are neurotypical have that breaking point where if you push and push, someone's going to snap.
That's fair.
And it's not to say that snapping is ever okay on people. It's just to say that it's eventually going to happen if someone is pushing and pushing and pushing. And we still have to take accountability. We have to learn to take accountability for our behaviors, even if we feel like we were out of control in the moment. Sometimes our rages do feel very uncontrollable.
Gotcha.
But I wish that more people just understood that we're just human. We just have very intense emotions, and sometimes that can lead to toxic behaviors. I feel like it's very important to not ignore the fact that we have toxic behaviors, because I'll see a lot of borderlines on social media who are like, oh, I can never do anything toxic. I'm not a toxic person. And I'm like, if you have borderline personality disorder, you were undiagnosed at some point, you were going untreated at some point, I guarantee you were toxic during that time in your life. I guarantee it.
You know what I think it's tricky too, and a lot of people with personality disorders talk about kind of struggling with this, is a lot of it is perspective for people with personality disorders. So they feel as though the behaviors they're doing are normal. It's the other person that's kind of upset. Well, you made me mad, so it was okay for me to throw that across the room, or it's okay for me to have that rage, as opposed to, well, neither one of you are really right in that situation.
Exactly.
Or what do you wish people understood about NPD?
I wish people understood, this is going to sound so cliche, but I wish people understood that we're not all abusive monsters. We're not all out we don't seek victims to ruin people's lives. Like, we just have a disorder that makes it very difficult for us to have healthy relationships with people and to express our emotions in a healthy way. And I won't say a lot, but I'll say there are definitely those of us out there who want to work on these behaviors and want to get better. And those of us who do are trying to mitigate our symptoms so that we don't become toxic to the people we love.
I love that. I think that people sometimes are so hurt that it's kind of almost easier to vilify the other person. And sometimes people feel as though if I were to show empathy, then it's almost saying that I accept your behavior. And that's not what that means at all.
No, and not at all. I always say you can vilify the behavior, but not the disorder.
Oh, I love that.
Like if someone's doing something that's harmful or abusive to you, absolutely call them out on their behavior, but don't call them out for having a disorder that they cannot control.
And I love the fact that you are doing something about it so that you can control it by seeking treatment.
Exactly. It's a big pet peeve of mine when people know they have these disorders and refuse to seek treatment.
Do you find that there are things that makes your toxic behavior or your BPD triggers worse?
Romantic relationships make it a lot worse. And I found that in speaking with a lot of people with BPD, that's a common theme. Like they'll feel like they're almost even hitting remission to a point when they're single, but then they get into a relationship and it's like all of their symptoms come out, the jealousy, the rage, it's very easy to get triggered as a borderline when you're in that romantic relationship because you have that favorite person attachment. And favorite people aren't always romantic, but most of the time they are. You have that undying attachment for someone that you could never fathom them leaving or them being upset with you. So when that does happen, you get triggered into fight or flight and your brain just goes, okay, beast mode. I'm just like not thinking clearly.
So it almost sounds like you become, for lack of a better word, obsessive in some ways. Maybe the thoughts are kind of keep going over and over in your head, whether you like it or not.
Absolutely. People with borderline can become very obsessive with their favorite person. That's actually a common trope of the favorite person thing is how obsessive we get. I've known some borderlines to do absolutely horrible things in favor of their favorite person, and I personally don't agree with that. I have been known to compromise my morals to date a favorite person, like my personal morals. I am ashamed to admit, but I will admit it for the sake of education, that I have dated people who are transphobic. I have dated people who are racist because I quickly became attached to them. And it's something that I am working on. I don't want to compromise my morals anymore. I don't want to be in relationships with people who have different moral standards than I do, that like on human rights and things like that.
That's awesome. Good for you for working on that.
Thank you.
One of the things that we often will see is we see certain people with personality disorders together with others. And the common one is we find that narcissists tend to kind of feed off of borderlines. Have you found yourself attracted to narcissists or in relationships with them before?
I cannot say for certain because I personally believe that narcissists are only people who are diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder or traits of it.
Okay.
So I can't diagnose my exes or my dad, for instance, but I can say that I would not be shocked if they were to ever get that diagnosis.
Gotcha. Yeah, we'll see that because people with borderline personality disorder have that fear of abandonment, that they're almost willing to compromise, like you said, morals or maybe be treated poorly. And then a narcissist is looking for that unconditional adoration. So it's like, this is the perfect victim to kind of take. They'll put up with anything I kind of throw at them. Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah. Like I said, narcissists aren't like necessarily looking for victims, but they are looking for people that can fill their need for admiration. I don't think that we necessarily think of it as, ooh, this is my next victim. Like it's not like some malicious TV villain trope.
Thank you for clarifying that. You can't emphasize that enough. Trust me. I can't tell you how many things I see in the comments. And I know that also when people say these things about narcissists and they demonize them, that's coming from a place of hurt also. It's
Yeah, it's understandable, but it's not
right.
acceptable.
Exactly. How does it go when you try to explain BPD or MPD to people in your life?
It has gone decently sometimes, and it has gone terribly other times. I was open with one of my friends very recently, who is no longer a friend now, about my narcissistic personality disorder traits, like being manipulative and being very toxic to people. And he decided to take to Snapchat to say that I am a manipulative, see you next Tuesday, and tell everyone that I give BPD a bad name and that I'm just a terrible person, and to tell my ex, my favorite person, to never get back together with me. So that moment really opening up about my diagnosis went terribly wrong at that point in time.
So sorry you went through that. I'm glad that you also cared enough for yourself to say this person is no longer a friend, and
Yeah.
you're cutting that off. Good for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. One of the hallmarks of BPD is this chronic sense of emptiness. And you mentioned, like with MPD, feeling that void for adoration. Could you describe a little bit what that's like for you?
I get an excessive need for validation less than admiration. I need people to validate my traumas and things like that because they were so often invalidated in my childhood and by my family even today. I'll be told by my family, you never went through trauma, you don't have any trauma, we never did anything to you, you were never assaulted, things like that. One thing that I want people to understand about personality disorders, because this is something I've been getting a lot in my live streams, is people telling me that people with personality disorders will make up trauma and that they'll lie about their abuse. And I don't think that's true. I feel like, it's a good 90% of people with borderline personality disorder have experienced some form of abuse in their lifetime. I believe that there is no reason for anyone to lie about abuse. That's me personally. I know there are people who do. However, I feel like it's very, very rare for someone to do that.
I agree. I totally agree. You do see a theme of trauma amongst people with BPD. Absolutely. We know it's not everyone. And there's some people, and that's what makes us think so maybe there's a genetic or a neurological component to it. Then some of it, I think, and I think this is what we miss in doing research, some of it is what we consider to be perceived trauma. So an example I often use is I had a young man whose mother was a single mom and she was raising 4 kids. And so she worked all the time. And in his mind, she abandoned me. She was never there for me. In her mind, it was I had to provide for 4 kids. I was a single mom. I had to work all the time. It's not to say that it didn't happen. He was abandoned in a sense. It just was not in the typical sense we may think of. Oh, she left him in a dumpster or something on his own, So I think that we do that sometimes.
Yeah, the brain can definitely. Two people can go through it's so interesting because 2 people can go through the same traumatic event and one of them walks out with PTSD and the other just shrugs it off.
Exactly. We even see this in twin studies, whereas one person will develop a PTSD or a personality disorder and the other doesn't. Or one twin will have one personality disorder and then the other will have a different personality disorder. And they have similar experiences, grow up in the same home, same family, so on and so on. But everyone's different.
Me and my ex, we had similar home lives, just very much being abandoned and abused and things like that. And I took the route of borderline personality disorder, and I noticed that he took the route of more narcissistic traits. And this was before I knew that I also had comorbid MPD. So I thought that was really interesting that I kind of took the route of BPD, whereas he took the route of traits of narcissism, because 2 people can go through the same thing and just have completely different outcomes of it.
Isn't that wild? It's just
it is.
Our brains work and experience and all these other good things. It's bananas. I had a client once, and every session, and she was in her 30s, every session we would meet, she would talk about when she was like 10, she saw her dog get hit by a truck, unfortunately, as horrible as that is. And it was very traumatic for her. And I thought about it as, I think a lot of us would be upset about it. understandably, but I don't know that everyone would talk about it and still be so affected about it 20 years later. But she was, and it's just, we're all different.
Also, there was one thing that my best friend wanted me to mention, the fact that
Yes.
I'm BPD and NPD, and my best friend is a psychopath. She's diagnosed ASPD.
Really?
So that's a very interesting combination that she thought I should bring up.
That is very interesting. What is the kind of dynamic between the two of you? Do you guys get along well?
We do get along well. The way she phrases it, we kind of balance each other out. I help her to recognize emotionality more, and
Mhm.
she helps me to kind of deal with it less because my emotions are so intense that I can't handle them very often. She kind of helps me to regulate my emotions, whereas I teach her how to be more emotional.
And does she have a desire to be more emotional?
She does have a desire to feel more things than what she can actually feel. There's this huge stigma against ASPD then that they can't feel anything and that
Right.
they have no emotion whatsoever. They do have emotion. The emotions are just typically muted. And she does have a desire to feel more than what she currently does. She mostly feels empathy for animals and a select few people in her life. She
Mhm.
doesn't really experience empathy for other things, though.
Speaking of that, reminds me, you were talking earlier that narcissists will have guilt and shame and things like that. I know in my experience in working with them, I often find that they can be empathetic. And people think that they're just robots and they don't care about anyone or anything. They can be empathetic. A lot of times I've noticed that it's more so that empathy will show up as something they can relate to. So for instance, if you said you were bullied and they've been bullied before, they are going to go to bat for you and they are there with you and they feel it. But if it's not so much something they can relate to, I don't see it as much. Do you feel that way?
Absolutely. I am very good at like relating to people that have been through the same experiences that I've been through. It's just very difficult for me. I have cognitive empathy, but
Yes.
it's very difficult. And I have compassionate empathy. However, I don't really have effective empathy. If someone's gone through something terrible that I've never been through, I can be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That must have been
Mhm.
so horrible. But I can't really put myself in their shoes and think of how they would have felt.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I love your sweatshirt, by the way. I just noticed that. That's
Thank you.
awesome.
I got it on TikTok shop.
That's cool. Was being diagnosed, was that like an aha moment for you?
Being diagnosed with borderline was an aha moment for me,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay.
It was like, oh, now I finally know why I've had all these kind of borderline psychotic behaviors.
Mhm.
Because when I was a teenager, I would threaten to off myself if I felt like someone was going to leave me in
Okay.
my relationship. I would cut myself after every little argument. Anything that made me feel like not a good partner, I would be self-harming or attempting suicide over, and anything that gave me any semblance of abandonment as well. So when I got my borderline diagnosis, I realized, oh, okay, this is the stuff I have to work on. This is now I know what's wrong with me. Now I know how to fix it. And then it was similar with the narcissistic personality disorder. However, I was a lot more reluctant to be like, okay, these are my behaviors.
Mhm. Okay. And the reason why I asked that is that it's such a debate in our field to whether you should even tell a person that they have a personality disorder. There's some people that say no. It's more so for insurance purposes. It doesn't really matter. And some people feel as though yes, it can be supportive. I kind of go with my gut and kind of do I feel as though this will be helpful to the client or not? If I feel like it's something that's going to stigmatize them, maybe I'll wait a little bit before I tell them, hey, I think this is what's kind of you're struggling with here. Um,
Yeah.
I, I had one client, I met him for a first session, and I said, based off of stuff you've told me, it sounds like your dad may have been narcissistic, and it's definitely you're definitely meeting criteria for BPD. And he seemed to take it well. And he said, okay, no problem. And when he came to see the next time, he said, I actually left here very pissed off. And he's like, how does this guy know all this about me? He just met me. And he said, I started Googling it. And it's like, well, yeah, I do. All that makes sense. I had all the marks on it. So, okay, but how did you figure that out? So I think we need to be very careful at
Yeah,
giving information.
definitely. My
Yes.
personal belief on it is that everyone has a right to know their diagnosis. That's just
Mhm.
how I feel. But that could be me being biased as someone with personality disorders who would like
No,
to know everything about my diagnosis. I
I
just
think,
feel like the
mhm.
more information one has about their diagnosis, the better equipped they will be to start treatment for it.
See, that's how I feel. I know that some of the concern with therapists is people with and you can tell me if you agree or not, but people with personality disorders tend to sometimes misinterpret things and they take them as an attack. So I think the
Oh,
concern is
absolutely.
being overly sensitive and like, like the guy said, how did you know all that about me? You can't be right. How do you work with that sensitivity?
It's very difficult. I'm not going to lie. I
Mhm.
view a lot of things as a personal attack. Like if someone's telling me how I've hurt them, I tend to shut down and have a panic attack. It's
Oh,
actually a very big issue with my favorite person right now that I will cry and shut down and have a panic attack when being confronted with something I did that was wrong because narcissists tend to feel a lot of shame surrounding their behaviors,
mhm.
and we will do anything to avoid feeling that shame. So when we are confronted with it, we tend to shut down. It's a very shame-based disorder,
Yes, it
narcissistic
is.
personality disorder. So we will try our best to avoid it. And I'm really working on right now, not shutting down as much and trying to, because I shut down not only because of shame, but also because I go into fight or flight. Like if he's upset with me,
Mhm.
there's never ever been an indicator that he would ever do something to me, like hit me or anything.
Right.
Because I've been hit before, I feel like, oh, it's going to happen again, even though there's never been any indicator that he would.
So you go on the defensive. It's interesting. I know a hallmark of BPD is to both overvalue and then undervalue people. And then a lot of times what we see with narcissists is when they feel devalued or they feel as though they're being shamed, they'll start to devalue others. But you sound like you actually shut down. It's interesting your response. Do
I
you think?
do shut down. I won't. My version of devaluing people is different than a lot of borderlines and
Mhm.
narcissists because my version of devaluing isn't I hate you, you're a terrible person.
Okay.
My version of devaluing is it's very, very difficult for me to get angry with people or upset with people. But once I'm triggered, it's very easy.
Yes.
Um, like there was this one girl, it took so much for me to finally get mad at her enough to cut her off. She
Mhm.
ended up driving one of my friends to suicide, and that was when I was like, I'm done. She had been abusive to him for their entire relationship, and then when he killed himself, I was like, I'm done. No, you don't get access to me anymore. So the thing with me is that, like, when I shut down and devalue someone, it's less of I hate you and more of you're mad at me. So now I hate myself and I'm mad at you for making me hate myself.
So it sounds like a lot of internalizing.
Definitely. Very
Okay.
much so.
Got it. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. It's just, and what I love about this and you sharing that perspective is that not all people with personality disorders are the same. There's narcissists behave differently than one another, and people with BPD behave differently than one another. It's not textbook. So
Exactly.
I
I
get
was
a
diagnosed as a textbook case of borderline, actually. I was
really
diagnosed as like a house of symptoms.
okay.
Um, and basically, one thing that I tell everyone when they come into my live streams, because I'll do live streams, I'm a borderline narcissist, ask me anything.
Oh, I love that.
Um, People will ask me a lot of stuff about their personal narcissists in their lives. And I'll be like, one, I can't tell you how they're feeling because I'm not them. And two, you guys have to remember that I'm not only a narcissist, I also have borderline personality disorder. It's going to be different than the answer you would get from someone who's solely diagnosed with narcissistic. So oftentimes I will refer them to Jacob, who is the nameless narcissist on TikTok. He's a very good creator for NPD. So I'll refer them to him.
I love that. I love that you should go and share your story too. That's so cool. I'm going to check
Thank
out your
you.
live streams, and I think suggested everyone else check it out too. And what is your handle on TikTok?
Life of a Borderline Narc.
Life of a Borderline Narc. I love that. I had
Thank
two
you.
more questions for you. What is it that you would want therapists to know about your disorders, about your life, so on?
That we are not untreatable. We are just resistant to treatment because of the trauma that we've been through, because it's so difficult to unlearn behaviors that you've learned through trauma, but it's not impossible to treat us. And a lot of us are willing to put in the work to get better, as long as you're willing to work with us.
I love that you said that. I can even tell you in my own experience, before I was trained in treating personality disorders, it was kind of this, a lot of therapists would say, oh, borderlines are so difficult and they're manipulative, and they would get a really bad rap. And this narcissist, they can't be treated at all. There's no way to help them. They just are what they are. And then I started going through training in it. It's like, whoa, these are very treatable. They do not have to be lifelong conditions that affect your functioning, your relationships forever. They can be worked on. Like you said, provided that the client has enough motivation and is willing to put the work in, then they can be better. There is hope. And that's so cool. Yes. Thank you for saying that. I don't think a lot of people know that. And I think a lot of people think that it's just that. I think I run into it with clients too sometimes, because it fits their narrative that they have of someone who's hurt them. They're not willing to see that the person can get better, or that maybe they aren't a narcissist. Maybe they're just a jerk, or,
I actually made a video about this the other day,
Yeah.
about people who have been abusive in their past. And I basically said, can we stop the rhetoric that abusive people cannot change?
Yes.
Because that rhetoric makes it so difficult for us to want to get help and to want to get better and to admit that we have those behaviors and to admit that we need help. That rhetoric is very damaging to people who do want to get better with their behaviors. Not everyone, I'll be the first to admit I've been abusive in my past. I've been very emotionally abusive to people. I personally never hit anyone, but I have been very emotionally abusive in my past. And that is something that I am working on. That is not something that I want to be. That's not something that a lot of us want to be.
Excellent. That's so true. I don't think anyone chooses a life of difficult relationships or to be a bad person or a mean person. And that could just be my flawed view of people. I think most people want to be happy and they want other people to be happy. We may have different ways of going about it, or unhealthy ways we picked up, but I think most people are inherently good. Maybe that's not
Absolutely.
excellent. And my last question for you, I won't take too much of your time up, is that you mentioned that there's some things that you didn't necessarily agree with on my page. I would love to learn. Could you think of anything in particular?
Not in particular. I just noticed that some of your content does come across as like lumping all narcissists together.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the only note I have. Other than that, I think your content is great. I just suggest, if I may, like
Please.
clarifying more that not all narcissists are the same. Not all of them are out to get people.
Absolutely. Okay. I thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for doing this. I'm going to make sure we tag you in it for sure. Anything else you want to say on the record before I let you go?
On the record, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for watching this. I really appreciate it. And just be mindful that, everyone is struggling with things that you don't necessarily see on the surface.
Absolutely. I love that. You were so profound. I have to check out your lives, man. Thank you for agreeing with this. Thank you all for watching. I hope to give you more great content. And check out this page, Life of a Borderline Narcissist. Excellent.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you. All right. Take care.
You too.